I'm not going to put a release date on this because I don't know when I'm going to release it. But at any rate, I've been following for some time and quite a bit since, I guess, the COVID shut lockdown period. The JFK assassination and various conspiracy theories around it versus the official Warren Commission report version. And I've just recently, been seeing a bunch of the conspiracy stuff, and then I recently saw a two-part series by a historian who strongly supports the Warren Commission viewpoint. So anyway, so it leaves me in a muddle because both sides seem to have a lot of good points and evidence. So let's start off with something along the lines of where the Warren Commission are, just as an opener to see where this goes to. It all seems to start off, there's a whole background of Oswald and his defection to Russia, or was it a false defection, and things that happened after that. And he finally finds himself out of work in Dallas, apparently fired because his employer had found out that he was dishonorably discharged from the Marine Corps, which had been changed after his return. In other words, it wasn't part of his original separation, but it was a kind of a bureaucratic change that was made later on. And so it begins with, there was a guy named Frazier who who had a sister who was having coffee with Ruth Paine, where Maria Oswald was living, and the sister had mentioned that Frazier had just got a job at the book depository building. And the ladies come up with the idea, well, maybe Lee could get a job down there too, with Oswald there. So Ruth Paine called him up and got in touch with the supervisor, and the supervisor said, yeah, we need some part-time help right now this time of the year, so go ahead and send him over. So Lee Oswald showed up and applied for the job. At the same time, somebody else had showed up to apply for a job. And so, according to the manager, he just arbitrarily decided to, put Oswald on the sixth floor, and there's a warehouse associated with it that's separate from the book depository building, and they sent the other person to the warehouse to work there. So that's how he even got in position to be able to do anything or to become a potential patsy, whichever we want to go. That had to happen first, and okay. And then we get to the JFK motorcade, which apparently had only been announced 3 days earlier that it was going to go by the book depository building. So in the Warren Commission version, which has some interesting points to it, the day before at Friday, I guess it'd be the Thursday night, he had apparently. Also, as part of this whole thing, once he got the job, he rode to work with Frazier because he didn't have a car. Okay, Oswald, that is. So he asked Frazier to drop him off at the Paine house because he needed to pick up curtain rods, as the story goes, which is supposedly the rifle, right? And then after that night there with Maria, when he leaves, he apparently leaves $170 in his wedding ring, and then goes to work with the curtain rods or the rifle, whichever it is. I mean, and that's the story anyhow. And of course, then the shooting happens, and here's the other suspicious thing that sort of supports Warren Commission. After the event happens, he leaves the building, leaves work midday with no legitimate reason to leave because nobody else was dismissed. And I presume the police want to question the people in the buildings to see who might be the assailant, right? And then ultimately ends up via first trying to get on a bus that gets blocked by traffic jam, and then by cab to his rooming house. Apparently puts on a jacket, gets his .38 revolver out, and heads off to a movie. Where he was eventually arrested, and of course in the Warren Commission version, he's encountered first by Officer Tippit, who he then fires 4 shots, killing the officer, and then moves on to the movie theater. And somebody saw the description apparently on the radio and called the police. The police go in, searching the movie theater. They find him. He resists arrest, goes for his pistol. They subdue him before he can fire a shot. And so it is. And that's how he ends up being arrested and eventually charged with both the murder of Tippit and the president. And of course, he's killed by Jack Ruby. I guess it would be 2 days later when he's being transferred to another jail facility. So anyway, that's the official story. And of course, so at this point, it looks pretty good. And you have to get around the fact that if he wasn't planning to do something pretty drastic, why would he leave his wedding ring behind? Well, maybe you can come up with an excuse. And why did he leave $170, which is apparently about all he allegedly had in cash? Because I think he was found with about $12 on him when he was arrested. So, and I don't think a whole lot of money was found in his rooming house when it was searched. So, okay, so that's the gist of it. It looks like the guy, perhaps because she rejected getting back together again, that he was bummed out, and that was his last straw, and he was going to do something significant before his end. Although why he goes to a movie theater, I know he wants to see one last movie. I mean, in that scenario, I'm not sure what he was planning on doing after the movie was over with. Obviously, in one sense, it makes sense. It's a way to disappear randomly. And if somebody hadn't noticed him going in there, he might have stayed there for hours until he was kicked out or something. Because in those days, unlike today where you have assigned seats in most theaters and you're expected to leave after the movie's over, in those days, people actually could just stay on to see the next showing and stuff. So, who knows? Anyway, I'm just go through that. Now, okay. Now, the problem with that is, of course, is that, for instance, one of the key issues that comes up is that right after the shooting, just a minute or so later, a police officer charges into the second floor of the book depository building and confronts Oswald, and the supervisor apparently was there and said, no, he works here, he's okay. And so the guy then charges up the stairs and eventually gets to the sixth floor, and that investigation goes on. Well, the theory is, how would he have time to stow the rifle away, which it was hidden, it wasn't left in plain sight by the window there or anything, and then get all the way down to the sixth floor, from the sixth floor to the first floor. Then apparently, one of the other witnesses reported that he changed turned $1 in for change in order to buy a Coke, and he was drinking a Coke apparently at the time he was confronted by the police officer, and apparently he didn't seem to be in any way. There's no evidence he was kind of fatigued or looked shook up or anything. So that presents the idea that he couldn't have really been the shooter. That's the conspiracy theory viewpoint. And his claim was that before that he'd been eating his lunch, as some sandwich he'd brought in on the first floor where the black workers work, because he was a big advocate of civil rights and being and so at any rate, so that's and in fact another question is, why would he shoot Kennedy, since Kennedy was a big advocate of civil rights and was a liberal figure, as opposed to some alternatives. But at any rate, maybe just for fame, whatever. But the point is, it does raise that issue. The other issues around it have to do with, there's a debate about the picture with him holding the rifle and having the pistol. Although he definitely showed up with the revolver at the movie theater, so that part apparently is true. And the police have matched one of the 4 bullets removed from Tippit's body to that pistol, according to the police's version, but not the other 3, interestingly. So the other evidence can be that nobody can find any ammunition in his rooming house for more ammunition for the Carcano. So we don't know which is a alleged murder weapon in the official version. And apparently he only had 4 rounds when he went there. Of course, he only fired 3, and when the officers examined the gun and opened the bolt, 1 round came out, and that was it. And so, at any rate, you get the idea that that's kind of the official version. Of course, so we don't see how he managed to get the second floor, and and have time to exchange a dollar for change to buy a Coke, and be in the position he was supposed to be in, which because a police officer apparently ran in there rather quickly because he had noticed some rounds being fired from the upper story, and of course went in and did it. So there you have that aspect of it. There are a lot of other conspiracy things around there that are alleged, and that gets into the whole muck of the subject, and that goes back to, well, his background. There's claims that, well, the defection to Russia wasn't a real defection; it was a false defection that was arranged by the U.S. intelligence community to basically, I think, do groundwork in the Soviet Union in order to kind of know how to get around there. To know, I mean, if you're going to put agents there, they need to know some basics of life there about how you do everything there in order to not be pretty much stand out as, who is this guy? He's obviously a foreign suspicious person, and the KGB will nab him real quick, right? So that was a theory of what his job was. It was no high level, spy stuff. It was more like just, learning the lay of the land, so to speak. I guess how you got an apartment, how everything worked in the system over there, transportation, whatever. So that, and supposedly he's supposed to have kept records, a diary of this, which he turned over when he came back. The other question is, if he was really a defector, why? Remember, he's a person who did have a security clearance. Why was he let go of the Marines right before he left? Supposedly because of his mother's situation. And in other words, it happens real quick. Where did he get the money to get there like he did? That's a bit in the question mark. And, and how did he learn Russian, and who trained him in that, and all that stuff. There's a whole conspiracy theory viewpoint about it. And why wasn't he brought into custody after he came back and at least put through the ringer for suspicion of he'd betrayed the country, maybe gave classified information to the Soviets, All that is been played as an argument against him. The other aspect is that in the situation, and when he was in New Orleans, he seemed to have he was the only member of a, quote, fair play for Cuba committee in the whole area that he became the sponsor of, and it was pretty clear cut from a lot of that committee, which was, I guess you'd say, a pro-commie committee, right? But was full of U.S. intelligence assets that infiltrated it. And he also seemed to be associated with a guy named Bannister, a former FBI agent, senior FBI agent, who was highly involved with the anti-Castro Cuban movement. And so, not to get into any more detail on that, and when he also was handing out these leaflets to support Cuba, and then when he got arrested, he called for be put in touch with the FBI over the issue, and apparently was then released. So it looks to me like there's certainly a case for the conspiracy thing that he actually was some kind of an intel asset, working counterintelligence and supporting the anti-Castro Cuban group. But then when that effort was ended, because Kennedy basically pulled all the support for that anti-Castro Cuban movement, around that time, he then went to Dallas, and okay, the rest is history. So all this suggests that he's not really quite the screaming red that everybody tries to make him out to be, And so, in other words, that may have been his cover to actually do his work. So then, why does he get involved in assassinating the president? That's essentially one of the key aspects of the conspiracy version, to which you add to the fact that the rifle itself was really apparently it was found with the scope not properly adjusted, and the question is, could he really have successfully carried out the shooting effectively in the time frame allotted? I mean, people like this Waren Commission videos I watched for the historian. You could definitely rip off 3 rounds that quick, but that doesn't mean you would hit what you're aiming at. You might, And we know one of the rounds is pretty much established to have been a complete miss. That's the very first one, was a complete miss, which should have been the most accurate of them, although there's some argument that a metal pole was in the way, or a tree, one of the two. There's different stories on that, which deflected the bullet. But we do know that somebody was nicked with either the bullet fragment or a piece of concrete off the road, or the side of the road, and that led to the single bullet theory, because otherwise, before that, they had the 3-bullet theory. But and since they only had 3 shell casings, and if they didn't want to have a grassy knoll shooter or somebody in the Deltec building or any of those things, then they're sort of forced into the answer they had. But then we have all the controversy about the, CE-399 bullet, which is semi-pristine. The irony of it is it's a bit flattened on the side, if you look at it on the side, but on the front it shows almost no deformation at all. And there's a real question about whether that was how that bullet came into play and into the custody of the FBI. And it was supposedly just found on a stretcher, and somehow, after hitting Kennedy in the back, it then somehow exited his throat, then somehow hit Connolly, and then went through him, and then came out, and then shattered his wrist, and then somehow went into his thigh, and then somehow comes out in that shape on a stretcher. And that seems very hokey. There's various arguments about the alignment of Kennedy versus Connolly, and and part of that mystery kind of has been settled, I think, in favor of the official version, that they were kind of in alignment with each other. But here's the problem: the evidence, both in the suit, Kennedy's suit, and the original thing, was that the bullet hole was somewhat lower in Kennedy's back. So somehow, how does it come up, not through his neck, but up and then out his throat, and then goes down into? If you see what I mean, if it was actually going up from the back, coming out the throat, it would be going up forward, not into Connolly. Where if it went through the back, it could have maybe hit Connolly like it's supposed to, except there's no front exit wound on Kennedy. Okay, so the whole thing is a mishmash. There are some bullet fragments in the front, on the front floor of the front of the car, and there's a nick on the rim of the windshield, and there's also a crack in the windshield, which might be where the 2 bullet fragments hit and then bounced down into the, So, but although this historian tries to claim it's been definitively linked to the Carcano rifle, from what I've read, it really isn't. There's a lot of controversy about the fragments being linked, and certainly not as positive as everybody said. So anyhow, that leads into, the other, there's also other things out there which are more in the murky area. There is a claim that there was another, quote, bent bullet that was found on the floor by somebody, but that's not really been, I don't think that's been confirmed. At any rate, it was never entered into evidence. So, okay. So, and we have all the reports of the grassy knoll shooter, and the argument from the doctors that the throat wound was an entrance wound, not an exit wound. And you have, of course, the head wound. It seems to be glancing from the front, and a large exit wound on the rear of the head, and a motorcycle policeman was actually hit with some of the debris from that. Which, if the bullet was coming from behind, you wouldn't think it would do that, right? And we also know that Jackie Kennedy, this is getting morbid, but okay, I'm going to just lay it out. It was actually instinctively crawling over the back of the trunk of the car to try to retrieve a piece that was going back, and that's where the Secret Service agent jumped on the back and got her back in the car. But at any rate, so you begin to see the dilemma here. There are witnesses that saw suspicious activity on the grassy knoll. There are reports that when police charged up the grassy knoll, they were confronted with somebody who presented what at least appeared to them to be Secret Service badges, and therefore they at that time that the attention had moved on toward the book depository building, so they left. So those people were never positively identified as being Secret Service, and the Secret Service claims that there was no such people on the grassy knoll. So I think, and of course we have the somewhat mysterious deaths supposedly of some of the witnesses, and we can, okay. But I can't go into everything in the conspiracy world, but you begin to see, I presented first a clear-cut idea where probably a disgruntled Oswald who just felt abandoned for whatever reason, just decided that he was going to make one last hurrah before he, is over with. And that certainly has been the phenomenon. And as this historian points out, that almost all, exception of the Lincoln assassination, all the other ones were really of that nature, either the attempts or disgruntled, mentally off people, or they weren't organized conspiracies. And it also makes a good case that Oswald doesn't look like the kind of person who had the marksmanship skills or that any high-level conspirators would use, or even, I would say, even a scratch group of anti-Castro Cubans would want something a little bit more competent than him, probably, right? So, anyway, that's the dilemma I'm left with here. I mean, if he's really an innocent Oswald, why does he leave the book depository building? He didn't, at that point, if he wasn't the shooter, probably wouldn't even know that Kennedy was actually hit. All he knew at that point is that there had been some shooting and the police were responding pretty aggressively, right? But he didn't know the outcome yet. So, at any rate, but why would he leave? That is a good question. And so, and an innocent Oswald, presumably, why would he then take a revolver and go to the movie? You see, that seems to taint him with guilt, I think, pretty seriously. And if he really did shoot Officer Tippit to death, I mean, that pretty well settles the issue. But then there's so many strange things going on that have been reported about that whole investigation on the shooting of Tippit. They never were able to get a clear positive idea, I don't think, that he was a shooter, that they had to sort of coach the witnesses to come to that conclusion. And other people said that there were two people involved in the shooting. And if they were, then, well, maybe somebody lied about matching the bullets, for instance. The trouble, though, I mean, I'm just saying that the innocent thing doesn't look right. And then if he's guilty, how could he have pulled it off? That's the other aspect. Because, I mean, maybe he just got, quote, lucky, as they say go, until he ran into Jack Ruby. But at any rate, then he got very unlucky. But at any rate, I just think it's an interesting thing, that what I call the enigma of the whole subject. On the other hand, if you want to believe he's innocent and somebody else was clearly shooting from the book depository building, then how did that person get there and not get recognized as a strange individual? And I'm saying, well, then you get into a whole other series, and then the whole thing becomes a quite complicated conspiracy. In the full-blown conspiracy theory that sort of is accepted by conspiracy people, you start having police officers that had a CIA background that planted a fake wallet at the Tippit shooting, only for the wallet to disappear later. As an example, you have the fact that somehow the records of the interrogation of Oswald itself all disappeared, right? And you have all these anomalies in the situation, and so it gets into into where you really it's hard to come to a definitive conclusion on it. To me, it's unclear why Oswald would do what he did if he's innocent afterwards. And even if you assume he didn't shoot Tippit and somebody else did it. Now, another thing is, why was Tippit then killed if Oswald didn't do it? What role did he have in this whole thing? That would become another issue. It seems to be very ironic that a police officer would be essentially assassinated on the street, unconnected with this, right at the same time. You get the feeling that, and by the way, Tippit's behavior was fairly erratic, according to some reports, before this happened. And so it's really hard to know what he was up to exactly either in that whole event. Anyway, I just kind of outlined the issue, which I think some people are interested in the subject. And so, I've played into other ideas at one time, on it, but that perhaps Oswald was actually gunning for Connally, and he had a reason to hate Connally because Connally was in charge, was Secretary of the Navy at the time. His discharge was removed from honorable to dishonorable, which was a very hindrance to his getting employment in a lot of places. So that was not, So he'd been writing to the Secretary of the Navy to try to get that reversed, because obviously if he really had been on an intelligence mission to Russia, not a real defector, then you'd have to look at the situation. He would feel very betrayed by this, right? And the fact that nobody would reverse it because the bureaucracy thought he really was a defector. And you can see the dilemma he was in, that he might have felt abandoned, and therefore Connally would be his target. But I've checked on this, and as far as we know, there was no clear evidence he would have known Connally would be riding in the car with Kennedy. So one could argue how the Kennedy could have gotten hit in that scenario, but because of the positioning of the two seats. But anyway, I've thrown that out. That was just a wild hair idea I threw out one time. I'm not sure I would stick with that, but it is interesting. But when you really look at it, this whole thing, it remains an enigma. So I'll just leave this at that. I mean, I just throw out some pieces of the story, not all of them. It's a lengthy thing, could go on forever. But let's see what people think of this. So if and when I post this, I'll be, of course, putting the addresses of my social media accounts in the description below. And so, and I also would post on YouTube and Rumble. So all for this time.